Abolitionism was a movement in the Americas that focused on ending the slave trade and emancipating blacks from the inhumane conditions of slavery. In the late 1800s, America found herself in a dire predicament. The North was based upon an industrial economy while the South flourished from an agricultural economy. The 1860 presidential victory of Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery to the western United States, marked a turning point in the abolitionist movement. Convinced that their way of life was threatened, 11 southern states seceded from the Union, which led to the American Civil War. American abolitionism was accused of threatening the harmony of North and South in the Union. The abolitionist movement in the North was led by social reformers such as Thomas Paine and William Lloyd Garrison, founder of the American Anti-Slavery Society, and The Liberator, one of the first anti-slavery and human rights newspapers. The Society for the Relief of Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage was actually the first American abolition society, formed April 14, 1775 in Philadelphia, primarily by Quakers who had strong religious objections to slavery. Thomas Paine wrote a scathing article originally published in 1775 called African Slavery in America, and was the first article published in what would become the United States, which advocated abolishing slavery and freeing the slaves. William Lloyd Garrison released The Liberator on January 1, 1831. It bore the motto, "Our country is the world, our countrymen are mankind." The Liberator soon gained Garrison a national abolitionist reputation. Southerners assumed a connection between his aggressive journalism and Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion in Virginia, and tended to see him as a symbol of unbridled Northern anti-slavery radicalism. The state of Georgia offered $5,000 for his arrest and conviction. Garrison, for his part, continued to pour invective not only on slaveholders, but on those who failed to attack the system as violently as he. Northerners who equivocated were guilty of moral lapses. Southerners were satanic man-stealers. Garrison supported the Civil War since he believed it was an act of providence to destroy slavery, and his son even served as an officer in the Massachusetts African American Regiment. Critical at first of President Abraham Lincoln for making preservation of the Union rather than abolition of slavery his chief aim, Garrison would come to praise the president's Emancipation Proclamation. Garrison wrote his last editorial on December 29, 1865, stating that the object for which the Liberator was commenced, the extermination of chattel slavery, has been gloriously consummated. David Walker was born free of a free mother and slave father in Wilmington, North Carolina on September 28, 1785. He learned to read and write, and he read extensively on the subjects of revolution and resistance to oppression. When he was about 30, he left the South and settled in Boston, Massachusetts, where he became an agent for Freedom's Journal, a black abolitionist newspaper, as well as a leader in the Colored Association. Walker published an anti-slavery article in September 1828. Along with 3 other articles, it became the pamphlet originally called Walker's Appeal. The goal of the appeal was to instill pride in its black readers and give hope that change would someday come. The articles were articulate and militant in their acerbic condemnation of slavery, its profiteers, and those who accepted the practice. Walker called for vengeance against white men, but he also expressed the hope that their cruel behavior toward blacks would change, making vengeance unnecessary. His message to the slaves was direct: if liberty is not given, then rise in bloody rebellion. His writings were so eloquently harsh that good-hearted abolitionists like Garrison publicly embraced the spirit of the document but denounced its inflammatory rhetoric in favor of more convenient means of change. Not surprisingly, a price of $10,000 alive or $1,000 dead was placed on his head, and in June of 1830, Walker was found in his home, dead of unknown causes. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born in February of 1818 in Maryland. He was the product of a white man and black slave mother. Douglas himself lived the brutal life of a slave until he escaped to freedom in his early 20s. During his formative years, he learned to read and write while being loaned out to a Baltimore carpenter named Hugh Auld. He first became acquainted with the Abolitionist Movement while in Baltimore and decided to join its cause as soon as he could make his escape from bondage, and he did escape to New York in 1838. 2 years later, he met Garrison and was so impressed with his sympathy towards slaves that he joined the Anti-Slavery Society and began giving uplifting and empowering speeches that continued throughout his life as a human rights activist. In 1848, Douglas published the first issue of the North Star, a 4-page weekly out of Rochester, New York. The North Star's slogan, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren," testifies to the broad scope of the newspaper's coverage. Douglas allied with Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War and recruited many Northern blacks for the Union Army. After years of traveling the world and speaking against slavery and on behalf of women's suffrage, Douglas died February 20th, 1895 from a massive heart attack in the company of his wife at their home in Anacostia, New York. While male abolitionists such as Payne, Garrison, and Douglas published newspapers and periodicals, Harriet Beecher Stowe penned a novel that became a classic whose theme was as prevalent in 1852 as it is today. The Civil War arose from several causes, including regional conflicts between North and South, economic reality, and abolitionist concerns for the welfare of enslaved people. Uncle Tom's Cabin contributed to the outbreak of war by personalizing the political and economic arguments about slavery. Stowe's informal conversational writing style inspired people in a way that political speeches, tracts, and newspaper accounts could not. Uncle Tom's Cabin helped many 19th century Americans determine just what kind of country they wanted to live in. After the secession of 11 southern states in 1860, the Lincoln administration considered the acts of those states as rebellion against the Union. Hostilities began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces attacked a U.S. military base at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Lincoln responded by calling for a volunteer army from each state, leading to declarations of secession by 4 more southern slave states. Both sides raised armies as the Union assumed control of the border states early in the war and established a naval blockade. In 1862, in an effort to preserve the economy of the Union and secure industrial interests, knowing that slavery could not coexist in a more technical society, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves held in the Confederate States, and in 1865 the 13th Amendment to the Constitution prohibited slavery throughout the country. The proclamation was issued in 2 parts. The first part, issued on September 22, 1862, was a preliminary announcement outlining the intent of the second part, which officially went into effect 100 days later on January 1, 1863, during the second year of the Civil War. It was Abraham Lincoln's declaration that all slaves would be permanently freed in all areas of the Confederacy that had not already returned to federal control by January 1, 1863. After 4 years of war that almost destroyed America, the last Confederate general surrendered on June 23, 1865 at Fort Towson, Oklahoma, ending the Civil War. It took the efforts of brave abolitionists, both white and black, as well as a war based on practical economic preservation to end the barbaric tradition of slavery in the Americas. Thus, the Hebrew slaves that had served for more than 200 years were now free, only to become captives in a strange land with no home to return to. Abolitionism was a movement in the Americas that focused on ending the slave trade and emancipating blacks from the inhumane conditions of slavery. In the late 1800s, America found herself in a dire predicament. The North was based upon an industrial economy while the South flourished from an agricultural economy. The 1860 presidential victory of Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery to the western United States, marked a turning point in the abolitionist movement. Convinced that their way of life was threatened, 11 southern states seceded from the Union, which led to the American Civil War.